Hi, this is Dan Watanabe, and welcome to the premiere episode of Backward Engineering Your Script, a totally different way of looking at the screenwriting process. Unlike other videos that you might have seen or books that you might have read, we're going to actually examine the process of writing from the point of view of someone who will be an ultimate buyer. And in the process of doing that, we'll talk about even who some of the buyers might be. Agents, managers, producers, development execs, distributors. Every one of these people is a potential buyer. And if you don't really look at who the buyer is, then you might have a difficulty selling your script. But here's the good news. The good news is that we will be dispelling a lot of myths about screenwriting. We'll be dispelling a lot of myths about Hollywood. We'll be dispelling a lot of the concerns you might have about entering this wild and crazy career. And let me tell you something. If this fat Asian could come over from Japan and become a vice president of a multinational corporation, anybody can do it. What is my credentials for doing this? Well, for 16 years, I was an executive at a company now known as Fremantle Media. And at Fremantle Media, I was in charge of development as well as current production on a number of what was at that time called first-run syndication shows. The show you might be most familiar with me working on was a show called Baywatch. And I know you're probably thinking, oh my God, why would I listen to someone who worked on Baywatch? Well, the reason for that is because that show was a hit. And not only was it was a hit among audiences that you probably aren't expecting it to have been a hit with. So we will be talking about all of those things during the course of these videos. The good news is that as someone who's from the business end, I can tell you the inside secrets of what people look for in a script, what they look for in a writer, and what's the best way for you to handle some of the more challenging aspects of an entertainment-oriented career. Now, as a bit of a disclosure, as a development exec, I was not a good writer, but that's actually to your benefit. Because the last thing you want to really do is be in a room pitching a script to someone who's a real writer, because they will probably want to take it over. A development person's job is to advocate for your material, to try to make sure that it's the best that it can be. And unfortunately, in the time since I graduated from USC back in the 80s, there has been an explosion in the number of how-to books on writing screenplays and how to sell them. Without being too blunt, most of those are a bunch of crap. They can, at their worst, propel writer's block. So part of the reason why I want to talk to you as a buyer is to get you over that initial fear of writing something that might not be perfect. For today, I want to talk to you about an aspect that is always talked about in the development office, but I, to be frank with you, have never seen in any of the books of screenwriting, whether it be Sid Field, Bob McKee, David Trattoria, none of them. And yet, it's the way the industry talks about writers. And what is that? Well, by and large, we tend to describe writers in one of three categories. You're a story writer, you're a character writer, or you're a scene writer. Now, if you happen to be a story writer, every book that's written about screenwriting, or at least the vast majority of them, are going to be very easy for you to follow. You will find them to be helpful in the most dramatic way. But if you are someone who is stronger on character, or you are someone who's stronger on scenes, you might find yourself frustrated. You might also find yourself getting to the point where you feel maybe you don't have talent. If you are in film school, this is especially a problem, because sometimes in academia, we tend to become very obsessed with process and theory and not with what makes things the best for the writer. Let me give a description of each of these types. Someone who is good with story is someone who is very structured. Think of it as someone who can write on a TV series a procedural, someone who would write an LA Law, someone who would write a 1 hour. That's because you automatically feel how the beats should come, where the commercial break should come. So structure is not is not outside of your realm of comfort. In feature films, these are often procedurals as well. Think of an Agatha Christie type mystery. Those tend to be extremely strong on structure. The second type of writer is someone who is good with character. Now, I'm not saying that if you're someone who's good with story, you can't have character. Obviously, you must have all three. But most writers have an extreme bias where one of these three areas is stronger for them than for the other two areas. So let's say you're good with character. That means that everything about your story revolves around what's happening to your central player. The highest and best with that is normally something like a sitcom. Because if you think about your average sitcom, how important is the story? Can we say often not at all? If you're talking about a sitcom you saw last night, how often is it that somebody says, well, what was it about? As opposed to, what were some of the funny moments? What were some of the memorable bits? In fact, a lot of times when we would be discussing what show we watched the night before as a sitcom, we wouldn't even remember what the story was, but we would be able to recite all of the really great setup and payoffs for the characters. So highest and best for that would be sitcoms or romantic comedies, or maybe characters who are fighting with themselves. The third, and this is the one that's perhaps the most controversial, is someone who is good with scenes. In terms of the nomenclature of writing, this tends to be the genre that writing teachers disdain the most, because these are movies and TV shows that are based on individual moments. They don't necessarily have strong characters, or they have characters that are fairly cardboard, and the actual stories are kind of coat hangers for individual scenes. And so they don't seem like high art, and maybe they're not, but some of the most successful genres happen to be exclusively scene-oriented. I think in terms of perhaps the most long-lasting and perpetually successful genre in Hollywood is the horror movie. Horror movies are very much based on individual scenes and what makes a scene come to life. They're almost like precious little vignettes where each murder becomes a work of art. You also have musicals, which everything is built toward the song. Now, again, these aren't necessarily genres that have a high quotient of aesthetic acceptability. So what? They're popular with audiences. And perhaps one of the most famous filmmakers of all time was exclusively scene-oriented, and that is Alfred Hitchcock. And if you look at most of his movies, yes, they have decent characters, yes, they have interesting stories, but what you take away from them is the individual moments. The murder in Psycho, the birds attacking Tippi Hedren, the guy falling off the tower, or the plane going in the water in Foreign Correspondent. So most of the big movies, the sci-fi epics, the Batman and Superman type movies, those are all highly scene-oriented. If you don't know what kind of writer you are, the easiest way to figure it out is to think of 3 movies or TV shows and just write them down, the first 3 that come to your head. And most of the time, just by the titles you picked, you will know. Another way is, if you've had some experience writing, think about how you talk to your friends about it. Do you start describing your character? Do you start describing what the situation is? Or do you start describing what a moment is? In future episodes, we will talk more about how to define who your character is and how to figure out what part of your life is you're basing all of this on. And we will discuss ways of coming up with a story that is interesting and entertaining. Thank you very much, and see you soon.